Good morning, Boker Tov. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with The Ways of Israel, and we're going to start this morning with a series live here on The Ways of Israel, and also I will be uploading it also to our YouTube page, youtube.com/Mr. Los Caminos de Israel, and there you can also see this later if you wish to review it and be part of the viewing. We have a whole series on this entire topic, which is based on Isaac Troche, an incredible scholar among the Karaites, in which he addresses a response to a lot of the Christians and Messianics that we can say even it was in his age, yet he did an incredible job responding to them in his time, which was about I think it was about 14th, 15th century, some years ago, many years ago. And I think it's very good for us to take a look at it because he gives biblical responses and interpretation of Scripture that responds. Now, he was asked by a Christian scholar of his time, Greek, regarding, we read nothing about the exile of the Jewish nation, only of the Babylonian, nor we read anything about them returning back. And he began, as you saw in the previous video, a response to that allegation that in fact it was predicted the second exile, which we are currently in, known as the exile of Rome, or the Roman or Edom exile. And he begins to now let him know that it doesn't end with only the return of the Jewish people to the nation, which interesting started in 1948 as Jews from every part of the world began returning to Eretz Israel, forming, even against the, you might say, the better judgment of many of the Hasidic religious Jews of that time, which is an interesting part of the story of how Israel became a nation in 1948 and how it was even used in such a way, utilizing the Zionist movement within the Christian world to help create the Balfour Declaration, something that would probably shock many of you to know that it was very much a religious Zionism, not so much secular, that it's what it became later, but it was actually motivated by a lot of the religious Zionist Christians and Jews who basically saw this as the opportune time to bring all Jews back to the land of Israel. One of the incredible rabbis that passed away during the Holocaust was a rabbi who created a book which I've spoken about many times, and he basically gives a response to a lot of the current day and then mindset that, to inhabit the land of Israel was usher. We find out and we see that in fact he was right, and there was a whole book that was that he wrote about it in response to his position in settling the land of Israel and inhabiting it for the proper time when all of Israel will return back to the land. In response to this, he begins to say that that the gates of Jerusalem would be continuously open and they should not be shut no day or night. This prediction did not come to pass during the second temple. For we observe in Nehemiah, and as I said, them let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun be hot. Hence you may conclude that not only these promises, as well as the above mentioned assurance, were not fulfilled during the time of the second temple, but just the contrary took place in respect, as we have already related in the previous video. We must therefore arrive at the conviction that all these prophecies and promises, and many others not mentioned here, refer to the redemption from captivity in which we are now. In other words, in his time, 1948 did not take place yet. So that means that this author, Isaac Troche, was looking forward to the time in which Jews would return back to the land, as took place and began to take place in 1948. Now we shall now proceed, he says, and this is where we're going to today's topic, we shall now proceed to consider the prediction of the downfall of the Gentile nations, which is to take place in the days of the expected Messiah. He positions this, the time of the nation's fall, during the time just prior to the arrival of the Messiah. Concerning that period, we read in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. I see it, and by the way, this is Bilam speaking. as he gives a prophecy through his mouth, the man who has eyes to see. He understands that Israel will be risen and brought to greatness, just as the fall of the nations take place. It says, and I see it, though it will not happen now. I behold it, though not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and the scepter shall rise out of Israel. It breaks down the corners of Moab, crushes the children of Seth, and the king, the Messiah, whose grandeur and lustre may make him comparable with the stars of heaven, which according to this prophecy, subject to all his powers, all the powers of the children of Seth. And he will perform such heroic deeds as were never accomplished before. And that there's a lot to comment about, but not in this point. To the exploit of this king are referable the conquest predicted in the above chapters in Numbers. And Edom shall become an inheritance, and Seir shall be a possessor of its enemies, and Israel shall do valiant deeds, brave deeds, courageous deeds. And he who is descended from Jacob shall rule, and he that escapes from the city of the enemy shall perish. The many predictions regarding Edom recorded in Isaiah or in Obadiah and other prophets have, by our laws, been explained as alluding to Rome. So here's where I want you to understand, and a very important point is that since the destruction, the destruction of the temple, and the power of Rome had extended throughout the world, and although there had been different types of powers arising trying to recreate that Roman power, we are still in the governance or under the subjection of the same power of Rome till this day. Although it has meshed with the Ishmaelite kingdoms and multiple other kingdoms, it is still part of Daniel's, you might say, meshed up toes of different components, creating the very basis of the feet, the last days. And obviously in his vision of Nebuchadnezzar, where he saw this big statue of himself, and what came about was a meteor-like rock coming from heaven and dashed the very basis of this image, which demolished it, and that created the new government. This was the image in the picture that the prophet Daniel gave, being that would be the destruction of the last kingdom, which is the kingdom that we're currently under in all the world, and that is this mesh of different kingdoms according to what we read in Daniel. Now, interesting, many predictions have been stated regarding this, that Edom would be the last power enmeshed with Ishmael. And there's more details that we'll be bringing up in these videos. For this effect, Isaiah tells us in Isaiah chapter 34, verse 8, for the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of retributions for the controversy of Zion. The biggest controversy is the issue of Zion. Any Jew, listen closely please, any Jew that says that their love is not for Zion, they do not love Zion, they have to examine themselves to see if in fact they are grounded in Torah. Because Zion is the very heartbeat of every single Jew, every single Israelite, every single person that's connected to Torah. So how can you say it's not? How can you be anti-Zionist? I understand that the new idea of a Zion without God, and that is completely opposite of the biblical Zion. The biblical Zionist basically believes in the full, complete fulfillment of everything that God said that would happen with the Jewish people in the land of Israel and throughout the world. Every iniquitous act committed by the adversaries of Zion will meet with condign visitation, and human liberty shall triumph on the ruins of tyranny. One of the greatest tyrannies that we're seeing today is what? It is the tyranny of the socialist, leftist Democrats in this country, trying to undermine this nation in order to subject it to a greater kingdom, a rebuilding, as it were, of the Roman Empire under the New World Order. And many people have a lot of different conspiracy theories, but the reality is this is taking place. Cannot be hidden anymore. The information that has been made public is such condemning, to condemn all of the different parties, including this medium that we use, that is part of a system in order to be able to control and monitor every single thing, every single person on the face of the world. Ted Cruz recently spoke about this regarding the incredible monopoly and power that they weigh in the areas of social media. So don't be fooled in thinking that it's not taking place. Just the opposite. We see every symptom and everything happening that is going to take place, the emergence of a one world government. And hence, we see there will be, before the coming of the Mashiach, the destruction of this, or of these nations as a whole. Yes, my friends, what's coming is going to be very, very unsettling, because prior to the coming of the Messiah, the nations of the world will be judged by God. Let me say that again, by God. And they're going to have to start wondering, what is happening to our nations, our governments? What is this taking place? Why is this taking place? Because Israel is not going to be no longer the scapegoat for all of these individual governments that are so opposed to Israel, opposed to the Jewish people, mouthing off against the Jew. As a matter of fact, every single person that mouths off against the Jew, God's keeping an account of every single one of you. And don't think you're going to escape. It's not a threat from me. It's a threat from God himself. Woe to him who touches the anointed of my people, or my people who are anointed, who are the apples of my eyes. And yet you have the audacity to speak evil and produce such marches in order to try to harm the Jewish people, the people of Israel. Whoa! So what do they try to do? This is what Isaac Troki is responding to. They try to replace the chosen people. They want to be the chosen people? Go for it. Chosen people has been marked by correction and by discipline throughout history. You don't see that in any other people as the people of Israel. Hence, the Redeemer of the Lord shall return unto Zion with joy, and everlasting gladness shall be upon their head. Exaltation and rejoicing shall reach them, and sorrow and affliction shall flee from them far away. The comfort promised in Lamentation of Jeremiah will then be realized, for in chapter 4, verse 22, it says, the punishment of thine iniquities, O daughter of Zion, has been fulfilled. Oh, we have paid more than enough for the sins of this world. And here we find it's been enough. It's been fulfilled. It's been completed. Your exile will end. He will no more lead thee into captivity. He has visited thine iniquities, O daughter of Edom. He hath laid bare thy sins. Love will then be shown by the Gentiles to the Jews. And according to Isaiah 66, verse 20, they will bring your brethren from among all the Gentiles as a gift unto the Lord, to Jerusalem, my holy mountain. Now, objection has been raised against a complete restoration of the Jews, grounded on some partial texts of Scripture. But let's refer to those who make this allegation to the following scriptural passages, which afford a complete refutation of such position. For in Joel says, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom a howling wilderness, on the account of the violence done to the children of Judah, and on the account of the innocent blood which they shed in their land. But Judah shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. My friends, one of the greatest things that we've seen in these past couple of 4 years is seeing Jerusalem declared and made public, the eternal city of Israel, not of a false Palestinian state, not of a false people that basically never existed in history. And here we find something that should raise the brow. This is why the nations now are upset at the Jews, at Israel, at the nation, at the people. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya biro. So we see the very fury of the nations arising against the Jewish people, and they want them to go back home. Great, let's go back home. But there are things that still need to take place, including the restoration and the return of all Jews from all the four corners that we read before, which means that prior to anything, and it's interesting that Troki makes mention of this. Many rabbis don't make mention of this, but before anything, before even talking about the coming of Mashiach, one of the basic things that we're going to look at Troki make mention about is this ingathering part that will be fully completed, and every single Jew, every single part of the people will return to Israel. And it appears that the Ishmaelites, the Mohammedans, have traced their origins back to Agar, the Mitzrayim, or the Egyptian bondwoman, and were therefore called by the prophets Mitzrayim, Egyptians. It appears also perfectly accountable that the prophet speaks of the children of Judah rather than the whole house of Israel. For on the overthrow of the 10 tribes, the name of the prevailing and distinguished tribe of Judah was adopted to designate the whole nation of Israel. This is where we call those who survived and are part of the Jewish people, the people of Israel, as Jews, or the tribes of Judah, and that was adopted to designate the whole nation of the whole. And hence we say, and Judah shall remain there and forever, Jerusalem from generations to generations. Obadiah actually predicts, the prophet Obadiah predicts that all Israel, not only Judah, shall obtain that ultimate victory. He says the house of Judah shall be a fire. The house of Joseph, these are descendants of Ephraim, as a flame. And the house of Esau as stubble. Now what would he use stubble for? Stubble basically is used as to burn. It has no purpose but to cause problems. And thus it's used as stubble. And it concludes saying, basically, and they will be burned up by these two elements. The Savior shall go up to the mount of Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall belong unto the Lord. Keep in mind, we're going to see a transformation of the kingdom of Esau in its final days prior to the destruction of this nation, or of these nations that's under the umbrella of Esau. And this is what we're talking about, the new one world government that will arise, will have a very short-lived history. It will be destroyed by the Mashiachs, or the Mashiachims, make reference to Avadiah. It makes reference, according to some, that these will rise to the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom shall belong to the Lord. In other words, there will be a takeover. And this takeover is going to be the destruction of the one world government, and will fall into the hands of these Mashiachims, which we'll go into that later. Who are they, according to Avadiah? And will fall into the hands of the Mashiach that God will appoint upon the whole entire world, as well as for Israel. A couple of things we need to take a look at as we begin into this study, and this will not finish in this one video. We're continuing the series of faith strengthened, so that you, my fellow Jew, instead of seeing everything that's happening and give up on your faith, strengthen your faith, strengthen your belief in the one God, strengthen your Torah learning. There's no reason why you should leave it. Just the opposite. You got to get even stronger in Torah learning. A couple of things that Troki tells us in the series of faith strengthened. Number one, that prophecies which are unfulfilled are yet to come to pass in the days of the expected Mashiach, Messiah. And a couple of things that need to take place. He enumerates about 20 different things. And we're going to start today enumerating some of these things that Troki says needs to still be fulfilled. The first thing that needs to be fulfilled, and this is why you see many rabbis now talking about the emerging communities of Jews taking place throughout the world, people from descendants of Israel, what they call Zerah Israel or Zeraim Israel, children, seeds, descendants of Israel from distant, be it from father and mother. They're coming up. We're working with a lot of these people to bring them back to Judaism, to bring them back to the faith of our forefathers. And this has a prophetic undertone, no doubt about it. And this is why the struggle is so great in this area. The ingathering of the 10 tribes and their union with Judah and Benjamin under the dominion of one king of the house of Judah. You can take a look at Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 16. And now, O son of man, take unto thee one staff, and write thereupon for Judah and for Israel. So one of the things we will see, and there's a lot of other passages that Troki doesn't mention, that we're aware of, that all the children of Israel must return. Just in Brazil alone, imagine 17 million descendants of Israel. In Mexico, one rabbi told me that they made some basic calculations, about 15 million. We begin to calculate where every Jew from every nation is located at. It's a large number. It's a very sizable number that will inhabit all the land of Israel that God promised Abraham and his descendants. So there's plenty of room. There's going to be some need to replace people who don't belong there. And obviously this will be an issue of shaking throughout the whole world, as humanitarian rights are going to be provoked by the displacement of people from that land. I think Mayor Kahana properly said that we can't, if we can't live together, then someone needs to move, and it's not going to be the Jews. Obviously, our history is full of people who've occupied our land, and we are now retaking the land inch by inch. And I support Bibi Netanyahu in his move, even though he may upset a lot of the political world leaders over this issue. I support him on this fact. Israel needs to be enlarged. Israel needs to be grand and make space for all of these millions of Jews that will be coming back to the land of Israel. And they are coming back, my friends. No doubt about it. Second thing we need to see, according to Troki, is the rise of Gog and Magog and their incursions into the territory of Israel. Some believe this has already happened. We're starting to see it with Iran, with Iraq, with Afghanistan, with the powers of Russia moving in and maneuvering into the areas, even to the areas what was considered Israeli land. And we see that taking place also in Ezekiel chapter 38 and chapter 39, and also Zechariah chapter 14, verse 12. And this shall be the plague which shall strike all the nations who have carried their host against Jerusalem. This is a warning. When you see the nations of the world, and keep in mind, leaders like President Biden, leaders like Clinton's, leaders like Obama, that would love to see Israel and Jerusalem diminished, don't forget what they said. They said if they were elected, they would want to see the return back of the status quo prior to Trump. They want to decentralize Jerusalem. They want to see a two-state solution. I'm not for a two-state solution. I'll tell you right now, any Jew that's for a two-state solution, they must be bonkers in their heads. Why? Because this is biblical promises coming to fruition in our very day before our very own eyes. And you must be crazy to give up on what God has promised us over the centuries, seeing it restored and was being restored. What did he do? What did Trump do that so started this whole commotion of anti-Israel sentiments? It really wasn't Trump. It was the enemies of Trump that still are in power in many of our political positions. And here we find the very spirit of the Gog and Magog, the very spirit of the one world government, the very spirit of the anti-God establishment in this country. Yes, and it's not only in this country, it's worldwide. It's in Canada as well. It's also in Latin America. It is a worldwide problem, the anti-God, the elitist thinkers that they say there is no God. And it's rooted within the communist thought, which happens to have been created by a Jew, but forget about that for a second. Every single great moment in history we have been involved in, be it for good or for bad. And the problem is that when the nations take on an attack against Jerusalem, and it's coming, it has not taken place. It did take place by Rome, as we read in another passage where Bar Kokhba took the city of Jerusalem, freed it from the Roman Empire, and was able to rule for 2 years. 2 years. Something that no other previous potential Messiah was able to do. Even today's potential Messiahs have been able to successfully do was to free Jerusalem. And yet, for this same reason, many people look at Trump as a serious, as a Cyrus of old, having established and affirmed the divine right giving to Israel, which is Jerusalem as its eternal capital. And this is why a lot of people look up Trump and saying, wow, this guy is doing God's bidding in the sense of making sure Israel is taken care of. What happens in the future, only God knows. But one thing is very clear, by the action that this president has taken, has had an incredible prophetic, biblical fulfillment in a lot of scriptures that people are still amazed. Now, this rise of Gog and Magog is clearly stated, and the nations that strike Jerusalem will be heavily penalized by God for doing so. The Mount of Olive shall be rent asunder, as it says in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4, and his feet shall stand on that day on the Mount of Olive, which is before Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives shall be rent asunder in the midst of the east and west, and so a very extended valley. So we're talking about Jerusalem being expanded. We're talking about a big earthquake possibly, or something of a great seismic action in Jerusalem. So keep your eyes alert, those of you who love eschatology and prophecy coming to fulfillment. The river of Egypt shall be divided and dried up prior to the gathering of the exiles of Judah. See Isaiah chapter 11, verse 15 and 16. So here we have the rivers drying up, and the Lord shall cause the tongue of the sea of Egypt to be dried up, and he will wave his hand against the river, and in strength of his spirit he will smite it into 7 rivers. And the men shall walk through it in dry shod or dry land, and shall be a path for the remnant of the people, which shall remain from Assyria, and was unto Israel on the day in which they went out of Egypt. Interesting enough, the same thing that happened in Egypt, in our liberation from Egypt, will take place again with our people in the land. So the good things are coming for the Jewish people. Ezekiel chapter 40, see here. In Ezekiel chapter 47, we read, the waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward, and the river shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaf shall not fade, nor fruits thereof be consumed. And that shall bring forth new fruit according to this month, because their waters they issued out of the sanctuary, and the fruit thereof shall be for meat, it would be the sustenance, and the leaf thereof for medicine. Also see verse 1 and verse 12. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 8 says, and it shall be in that day that the living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them towards the former sea, and half of them towards the hinder sea. In the summer and in the winter shall be. In Joel chapter 3 verse 18 we read, and it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, and fountains shall come forth of the house of the Lord, and shall water the valley of Shittim. Interesting point he also makes, and here on point number 6, I'm going to give a pause, because this is something that we see is taking place before our very own eyes. In point number 6, of over 20 points that he predicts that has not yet been fulfilled, and we're seeing these things fulfilled before our eyes. The conversion of the Gentiles to Judaism. The conversion of the Gentiles to Judaism. This passage has been misappropriated by many of the groups of Noahide. Listen closely. Many Noahide groups that they call themselves kosher Noahide has been misappropriated by many of the Noahide movement seeking this fulfillment with them. But these Noahide groups don't convert to Judaism. They want to keep them as a Noahide, as completely distant and apart. And yet we read the conversions of the Gentiles by Troche to Judaism is one of the telltale signs of a fulfillment of prophecies that we are to see in our days prior to the coming of Mashiach. And what will they say? According to Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, and they will say, who? 10 men from every nation will say to them, who is a Jew, who are Jews, we will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. And what will they do? As a matter of fact, it says they will take hold on the garments, making a reference to the tzitzits. First of all, each tzitzit of a Jew that hangs out on his talit represents a commandment of God. Normally, according to the Noahide teachings, a non-Jew is not allowed to observe a commandment that a Jew is commanded to keep. Yet we find this passage not a reference of observant Noahide, but rather of Gentiles taking hold on the commandments of the Jews to learn from the Jews how to keep them, because they're in the process of converting. And this is why Troche makes mention that the conversions of the Gentiles to Judaism is what is to be expected. Before anyone rejects Judaism, they need to be given the offer to become part of the people. It is a privilege to be part of the people. So you don't give someone the leftovers before you give them the main entree. You give them the benefit of being part of the family. If they don't want to be part of the family, that's fine. Keep the 7, go to heaven. But that was the mindset of the Rambam, not the current status quo that they push onto the Gentiles, the Noahide laws first, and then they want to convert. That is contrary to the Rambam's teaching, to the teachings of the sages, to the teachings of the Torah. When you come into the land, you want to be part of the people, then you have to come through the conversion. You don't want to do that? Okay, then at least follow these minimum rules for all humanity. Minimum. Now, why do we do this? Why do we first give them the offer to become part of the people? So that later on they can't say, oh, you're discriminating against me. You think we don't deserve being part and be treated as second level of citizens. That's the reason, really. Because we want to give the people the opportunity to be part of the entire nation of Israel. And that's a privilege. It's a privilege that few can comprehend, to understand, and be part of. Once you're part of the people, then you're part of the responsibility to carry forth the yoke of Torah, be lights to the nations, so that you can influence them. If you're not doing that, then there's something wrong with the mindset that has been created. So we're going to stop here, because we're going to look at that those nations that refused, that basically went at war with Israel, with the Jews, they're going to have to be forced to come every year after they're completely defeated. And one of the things that we'll see that they will be defeated by is when all of the armies of Israel will have to pick up all of the bodies in the valley of Megiddo, which is a very large valley in Israel. It's a perfect place for the final war. And there are going to be bodies top of bodies on top of bodies. Interesting enough, a similar situation happened when King Hezekiah was king over Israel. And many thought he was the Messiah, the Mashiach that was promised. And he prayed. He told people to pray and study and learn. And the armies that came against him, basically one day was set aside. They surrounded him to destroy him, to destroy Jerusalem. And all of a sudden it says that the Lord struck the armies of Assyria. The Lord basically killed them all. They were all burnt. Couldn't believe the miracle that happened. They woke up and all of these bodies were completely toasted. Could you imagine that? Toasted. And yet we read this thing is going to happen again, be repeated again during the end times, when there's going to be bodies of dead people from all the nations of the world that sent their armies. They sent the nation because the leaders of the nation were completely stuck, hardened against God, against His anointed, against Israel. And so they will send their army men to death when they go against Jerusalem. Why? Why do you want to do that? And this is the question I have for all these leaders in the nations, this wonderful, corrupt United Nations. Why do you insist to your own death? Why do you insist into your own destruction? Jerusalem has become a place of quivering for all the nations, a problem. You hear that in the mouth of AOC. You hear that in the mouth of that Jew hater Ilhan Omar. You hear that in the mouth of even traitors to the people like Bernie Sanders and many others. Why do you want to see the death of the nations? Because they didn't support your anti-Jewish, anti-life causes? My friends, we are about to see one of the greatest moments of history and one of the saddest moments of history, when we see the nations of the world's armies, human lives. We're not talking about a small size either. We're talking about millions, if not billions of lives killed instantly by the very fire of a divine reaction. Isn't COVID enough? And even China is mentioned in prophecy, in our scriptures, of how they too will be decimated. We're talking about a lot of people losing their life because of the leaders of the nations, their hatred towards Israel, towards Jews in general. It will be pathetic to see the millions, if not billions, of dead bodies that Israel's going to have to put a flag off and actually burn them, because the stench will be so terrible in the land. And then it will be demanded by every single nation, that every single nation once in a year we're going to have to come in representation to give homage to the one God we all believe and serve in. This is just the beginning of the end of this current one world rulership. And their death will be bodies throughout Israel and throughout the world, as the body counts of dead people will arise in numbers unfathomable. And it can be done completely different. It can be done in peace. It can be done in a good way. But the nations insist to destroy God's chosen people, Israel. Shalom, shalom. We will continue with the series and continue with the other 20 remaining, or actually less than 20, and with this of faith be strengthened. There are reasons why Mashiach hasn't come yet. But woe to us who have yet to see what's going to take place just prior to His coming, prior to His rule. Shalom, shalom. I want Mashiach now. Do you?